Hello to all Cinemaster lovers. Hope you enjoy watching. Let's get started. The movie begins with a person mixing egg yolks with a certain substance. After a few minutes, the egg yolk doubles, and the new version is identical to the original. We then go to the Hollywood Walk of Fame, where workers are crafting a star for the Oscar-winning actress Elizabeth Sparkle. Crowds gather around the star, taking photos. Over the years, no one cares about Elizabeth Starr anymore because she's aged and no longer acts like she used to. She now hosts fitness programs. One day, while at the studio, she heads to the women's restroom but finds it out of order, so she decides to use the men's restroom. There, she overhears producer Harvey talking on the phone, saying she's too old. The program needs a younger, prettier host, and it's time for her to resign. He mentions her Oscar win was a long time ago, and people have forgotten her. Elizabeth gets upset after hearing this and later goes to lunch with Harvey, who tells her people love change and, as a producer, he must deliver what the audience wants. Elizabeth realizes the program no longer needs her. On her way home, she sees workers removing her picture from a billboard. Distracted, she gets into an accident. At the hospital, the doctor performs an X-ray and finds her bones intact. The doctor recognizes her as the famous star, and Elizabeth cries, knowing her time has passed. Later, a young doctor examines her back and tells her she's suitable for a certain experiment. Elizabeth doesn't understand what he means. She leaves the hospital, noticing something in her pocket, a flash drive labeled The Formula with a number on the back. By chance, she meets an old school friend, Fred, who is happy to see her, compliments her beauty, and asks to meet up. He writes his number on a piece of paper, and Elizabeth feels happy to have seen him. At home, she feels deep sadness, especially when she receives a bouquet from her colleagues thanking her for the years she spent working with them. Elizabeth decides to play the flash drive, which contains an advertisement for a substance injected into DNA. This substance allows cells to replicate themselves, creating another version of oneself. The new version is younger and more beautiful. However, the two versions must alternate every 7 days. When one is awake, the other is unconscious, and vice versa. The ad stresses that both versions are the same person. Elizabeth dismisses the idea, throws the flash drive in the trash, and goes to eat at a restaurant. She sees a happy couple and feels lonely, realizing she's aging. She returns home, reminiscing about her days of fame and stardom. She reconsiders the formula, retrieves the flash drive from the trash, and calls the number to request it. The person on the phone gives her an address to pick up the formula and abruptly hangs up. Elizabeth writes the address on her hand, spends the night thinking, and struggles to sleep. The next morning, she sees a newspaper ad looking for a young, energetic host to replace her. She receives a package in the mail, containing a card with a number to collect the formula. She follows the instructions, goes to the designated location, opens a safe, and retrieves the formula, taking it home. Inside the package are the materials needed for the injection, along with food for both herself and her new version. There are also cards with instructions and conditions, the most important being the 7-day alternation. Elizabeth decides to use the formula, recalling the ad's promise of a younger, more beautiful version of herself. She injects herself. At first, nothing happens, and she thinks it's a scam. Suddenly, she feels dizzy, collapses, and writhes in pain. Her back splits open, and another person emerges. A cloning process occurs. Minutes later, the new version wakes up, looks in the mirror, and is amazed by her younger, more beautiful self, full of vitality. She stitches Elizabeth's back, who remains unconscious. She places a feeding solution in Elizabeth's hand to nourish her during the 7 days of unconsciousness. The new Elizabeth sleeps that night, unable to believe the process worked. She stands in front of the mirror, trying out her voice. Suddenly, she feels pain and notices blood from her nose. She discovers that one of the conditions is to take a daily sample of the original Elizabeth's DNA. Using a needle, she extracts spinal DNA, which sustains her for 7 days. Delays cause dizziness, but injecting the DNA restores her to normal. She exercises, testing her agility, and feels ecstatic with her new body. She notices the ad for a young program host and decides to apply. She buys an outfit to impress the selection committee. Meanwhile, the committee struggles to find a suitable candidate. When Elizabeth, now calling herself Sue, enters, they are captivated by her beauty and charisma. Producer Harvey decides to choose her as the new host, replacing Elizabeth. He tells her she's stunning and will be loved by the audience. Sue remembers she must alternate with the original Elizabeth every 7 days, so she tells Harvey she'll need to travel weekly to care for her sick mother. Harvey, displeased, insists she find a solution. Sue leaves, attracting attention with her beauty. She starts filming commercials, and the next day, she sees a large street advertisement for her new program, preparing for its launch. And every day, she would take a DNA sample from Elizabeth. The days passed until the 7 days were over. It was time for the switch, and she prepared the necessary materials. The formula reached Elizabeth's body, and after completing the procedure, Sue lost consciousness. Elizabeth woke up and connected to the food solution that would sustain her for the next 7 days. She headed to the studio and met Harvey, who treated her poorly, giving her old items, saying, "Take this book to keep you entertained while you stay at home," and he left. Elizabeth realized how despicable this producer was. She returned home and divided the days between her and Sue. Elizabeth lived her week in extreme boredom, having no job or family. One day, she received a message from the company that made the formula, informing her that the new shipment had arrived in her box. Elizabeth went to the same address to collect the shipment, which contained food for her and her duplicate. Days passed, and Sue woke up again, enjoying her new life, working on her commercials, and her popularity continued to grow over time. One day, she decided to renovate the bathroom, turning it into a room for Elizabeth, where she could place Elizabeth's body. The noise and disturbance caused her neighbor to complain and knock on her door, but upon seeing Sue's beauty, he calmed down completely. He asked, "Isn't this Elizabeth's apartment?" Sue replied, "No, Elizabeth has moved out and I am the new queen." Her neighbor introduced himself as Oliver, forgetting he came to complain, saying, "If you need any help, let me know. I'm available day and night for you." Sue noticed he had fallen in love with her. She returned to her apartment, placed Elizabeth in her new room, and hung her picture on the wall. Later, she appeared in the first episode of her show. Harvey praised Sue after the episode, saying, "You gave an amazing performance," and Sue felt very proud of herself. On the last day of the week, when it was time for the switch, Sue decided not to switch back with Elizabeth because she loved her life and wanted to live one more day. She went out with her new friends, brought her boyfriend home. Meanwhile, Elizabeth, sustained by her food solution, began to bleed from her nose and felt dizzy. Realizing she had delayed too long, Sue rushed to the bathroom, but instead of switching back with Elizabeth, she made a decision she might regret. She took a new DNA sample from Elizabeth's spinal cord and injected it into herself. She returned to her boyfriend and continued the night with him. When the night ended, she switched back with Elizabeth. When Elizabeth woke up, she found the apartment in chaos and was shocked to see one of her fingers had aged horribly. She called the formula company and explained what had happened, mentioning that Sue delayed in the exchange process for several hours. The man on the phone told her, "There is no such thing as you and her. You are both one. As for the deformity, it was caused by the delay, and any delay will result in consequences. The deformity cannot be fixed. Next time, do not forget the switch time to avoid any issues." Elizabeth cleaned up the mess from the previous night's party and saw Sue's commercial on TV. She admitted that Sue was indeed beautiful. The doorbell rang, and Elizabeth sneaked to see who it was. It was Oliver, asking Sue to join him for something in his apartment, saying, "I saw your commercial. You were amazing." Elizabeth did not respond, so Oliver said, "Take your time, I'll be waiting for you," and returned to his apartment. Afterward, Elizabeth went to collect her weekly shipment and sat in a nearby restaurant. There, someone told her, "The 7 days have passed by quickly." It turned out the man had also taken the formula, and his hands showed signs of deformity because his alternate had delayed the switch. Elizabeth noticed the stitches on his back and realized his alternate was the doctor she had met in her original form. Feeling frustrated by his words, she left the place, went home, and found Fred's number, which she had saved earlier. She remembered when he told her, "You are still beautiful as you are." Elizabeth felt happy and called him. Fred was surprised that Elizabeth had contacted him, saying, "I never expected you to care about me and call." They agreed to go out together at 8 p.m. That evening, Elizabeth dressed up and prepared herself, wearing large gloves to cover her hands. Before leaving, she glanced at Sue and saw her commercial. Elizabeth doubted her own beauty, changing her outfit and makeup multiple times, making her late for the appointment. She was about to leave but felt insecure again. She went to the bathroom, ruined her makeup completely, and did not go to meet Fred. Fred kept sending her messages, but she did not respond. She opened the fridge and ate to forget the tension she felt. The 7 days passed, and it was Sue's turn. Sue went out to see the state of the apartment, finding Elizabeth eating excessively in front of the TV out of boredom. Sue called the formula company saying, "7 days is too short for me. I don't have enough time to enjoy my life," and spent her 7 days lazily sitting in front of the TV. The person on the phone replied, "There is no such thing as you and her. You are both one." Sue got angry and hung up on him. When she returned to the studio, she met Harvey, who told her, "Your ratings are very high, and you are achieving great viewership. People love you. I've decided to give you a stronger and better show in a nighttime slot, as viewership is higher at night. This will be the biggest event, and you will become the most important TV star in the world." Sue was thrilled because she had become even more famous. Overwhelmed with advertisements and shows, she decided to consume more of Elizabeth's body to live beyond the 7 days. Every day, She took a DNA sample from Elizabeth. When Sue finally switched bodies with Elizabeth, Elizabeth was horrified and kept screaming about her body, which now had many deformed parts and damaged hair. She called the formula company saying, "Sue is stealing my time, making me age, and not caring about the consequences it has on me." The man replied, "You can stop the experiment anytime you want because you're the original version. You have the right to stop the formula and live alone in your own body, but your body won't return to its natural state." Elizabeth decides to continue the experiment because Sue is beautiful, successful, and achieving great success. Elizabeth continues her life in this state, even though she can no longer get up from the chair because her knee hurts, and she struggles to straighten her leg. She remembers the book Harvey gave her as a gift, a cookbook, so Elizabeth opens it and decides to pass the time learning cooking recipes. At the same time, she watches Sue, who has taken over the show. Elizabeth mocks her while she talks, and Sue also mocks Elizabeth, saying she's an old star who's outdated. Sue adds that she honestly never liked watching Elizabeth because her show was bad. Elizabeth feels upset when she hears this and eats a lot of food. She seriously considers canceling the formula altogether. One day, the switch between the two happens, and Sue gets very angry when she finds the room full of leftover food. Sue decides to take multiple DNA samples from Elizabeth, filling several bottles with her DNA, because Sue has decided to continue living in her body. 3 months pass, and Sue achieves even greater success. Her current boyfriend lives with her in the house. One day, Sue discovers that Elizabeth's DNA sample is no longer usable, so she calls the formula's number and explains the situation. The man tells her this happened because Elizabeth has been unconscious for a long time, and she needs to wake up for her DNA to regenerate properly. Sue is shocked because she didn't want to wake Elizabeth up, as Sue has an important show the next day. The man insists that Sue must switch with Elizabeth, or she will die. Indeed, Sue starts bleeding and collapses. With no other choice, she drags herself to perform the switch with Elizabeth. Sue's boyfriend hears noises coming from the bathroom and goes to check. Meanwhile, Elizabeth wakes up, her body entirely disfigured. She quickly locks the bathroom door before Sue's boyfriend sees her. Elizabeth looks in the mirror and is horrified by her monstrous appearance. She yells at Sue's boyfriend and orders him to leave. He, terrified and confused about who the woman talking to him is, leaves in fear. Elizabeth calls the formula's number and decides to stop the formula entirely. She retrieves her image from the living room and prepares to receive the shipment containing the materials to cancel the formula. She takes part of the shipment and prepares the termination injection. This injection, once administered to Sue, would end Sue's life entirely. Elizabeth gives Sue the injection, but suddenly stops before finishing the dose, hesitating to end Sue's life. She reconsiders because Sue is living a successful life, and Elizabeth knows the taste of success and fame. Elizabeth changes her mind and gathers the necessary materials for the switch process. However, due to the mixing of many substances, both Sue and Elizabeth remain alive. The two stare at each other in shock. Sue notices the termination injection and realizes Elizabeth intended to kill her. Sue becomes furious and attacks Elizabeth. Elizabeth tries to escape, but Sue chases her relentlessly, smashing Elizabeth's face into the mirror repeatedly until Elizabeth dies. Sue doesn't stop there and continues to beat Elizabeth's body to ensure she's dead. That night, Sue prepares for her show, but before it begins, she feels unwell. She goes to the bathroom and is horrified as one of her teeth falls out, followed by the rest of her teeth. It turns out that because the original version, Elizabeth, has died, Sue's body begins to deteriorate. Sue decides not to smile during her show to avoid anyone noticing. When she meets Harvey, she remains silent and only smiles. Afterward, she hurriedly leaves the place. She discovers her nails are falling off and her limbs are detaching. She rushes home and finds that the formula's dose is still there. She takes the dose, hoping to replicate herself into a better and more beautiful version. But the opposite happens. Sue transforms into a monster, and Elizabeth is reborn, her face appearing on Sue's back. These deformities occur because the formula was only meant to be taken once. Sue remembers her show, puts on a dress, and wears a mask with Elizabeth's face on it. She heads to the studio, appearing on stage in front of the audience in this state. She speaks into the microphone, and Elizabeth's mask falls off, revealing Sue's monstrous appearance. Sue's body parts begin to fall onto the floor, shocking and horrifying the audience. The crowd screams and flees the stage in terror, demanding the monster be killed. Someone cuts off Sue's head, and her blood splatters over the audience. The stage descends into chaos, drenched in Sue's blood. Sue tries to escape with what's left of her body, collapsing on the ground as her body disintegrates into pieces. All that remains is Elizabeth's face. Elizabeth crawls toward her star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, smiling as she remembers her days of fame and glory. Elizabeth then dies, her face melting away. The next morning, A cleaning truck cleans the blood off the ground, erasing all traces of the events. And here, the movie ends. Subscribe to the channel and activate the notification button so you never miss an updates.